So we are at 10:16, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. We're so excited to have you guys here. I think these summits are just a fabulous way to get the school year kind of on our minds and up and running for those of you that are starting soon and some of you that are starting later. So welcome. We have Natasha here. That's the other voice that you hear, and she's here to help. As co-host, she'll be monitoring, if I go to the next slide, she'll be monitoring chat and questions. So if you have specific questions to ask about what I'm saying or something wasn't clear, you didn't get something, please put it in Q&A and Natasha will help you with that. And then there'll be times when I'll be asking you to share in chat. Plus, one thing I respect is that you are all geniuses in your classroom and you have tips, and there's nothing that teachers like better than getting tips from each other. So that's where you can shine, is sharing something in chat for that. If you need to show captions, you can go down to the closed captions button. And the new one that is kind of surprised a lot of us here is that we have a resources button. So you can go in there and have access to any of the handouts that I'm going to be going over with you today. Okay. So a little about me. I have been a teacher for 25 years. I'm from Southern California, originally from Canada, but from Southern California, where I got my teaching credential, and I was at South Tahoe High School for 25 years. So you can take a look at these images and see what my classroom looked like. I know a lot of you are TCI addicts, so this is what your classroom looks like. It's interactive, it's fun, but bottom line, students are truly, truly learning the content. So that's my background, and I have been training with TCI since 1998. So that tells you a little bit about how old I am. Been around for a little bit. Okay, so what are we going to be covering in this session for you today? So we're going to be looking at TCI's strategy for several of the activities that you will have at your grade level disposal. And it's the response group activity. And we'll go over the 5 steps that will help you with classroom discussions to give it variety, to make sure that you're getting participation from more students. And when you come to a response group strategy in your TCI program, there's some tips and tricks to help you make it even better. Then we're going to give you some engagement strategies for discussions, some of which you might have seen before. Some might be new to you, like fishbowl discussion. I think most teachers are familiar with the fishbowl discussion. So that's one of them, but there might be some new ones in there that you find useful for your own classroom. And then we're just going to take a quick look. This session was highlighted for middle school teachers, but you don't necessarily have to be a middle school teacher. If you're a high school teacher, if you're an elementary teacher in this session, that's fine. But I'm going to be looking at just a few examples of what they look like in our TCI programs for middle school. Okay, so right now I have a Menti for you, and here is a QR code, and the code if you choose to go to Menti. I have my fingers crossed right now because as a classic high school teacher, technology is something that I sometimes have, a little bit of struggling with. So I'm going to go into mine and present, and I guess it's working because I'm getting some responses. So yay, outstanding. So if you're doing classroom discussions and you feel like everybody's just kind of off doing their own thing, and when you go to one side of the room, the other side of the room is doing something else, that's A, herding cats. If it's B and you have the hand go up constantly from those few students and you feel like everybody in the class is constantly listening to them, which is, I have 82% of you right now there. It's a tough one because you don't want to shut them down. You want to respect what they have to share, but you also want to open the door for other students to share. And then C is just looking at that classroom that it's empty. It's like, is anyone even listening to me? So I'm going to show the code again, just in case somebody needed that. It's a little bit quicker to get into the support. So I think what I'm seeing is that a lot of you are dealing with those students that tend to be the ones to share. And what I find is response groups still give them their moment, but it allows for every single student in your class to be able to share out for the rest of the class to listen to. And that's the beauty of it. And why I think it's my favorite strategy. Well, there's a lot of reasons it's my favorite strategy, but that's one. So thank you for sharing on that. And I'm going to just do something really quick before I leave that. Okay, so let's find out some discussion lesson best practices that you can use in your classroom. So there are 5 steps, if you will, to the response group strategy. And I'm going to quickly just cover each one of these steps so that when you do one, you kind of know that it's hitting all of these bullet points. Then on the screen, you can see that I have pulled a sample response group lesson from one of our lessons. And you can see that when you guys are using your slideshows, and some of you are newbies, as I saw in the opening session, and some of you are, you go way back with TCI, but using our lesson slideshows, when you get to the activity portion of the lesson, it will say which strategy it is. So I saw somebody loves social studies skill builder in our chat earlier. So it would say activity, social studies skill builder, or activity response group, or activity problem solving group work, and so on. So the first slide always gives you kind of an overview of what your students are going to do specifically in the activity. So what a response group strategy does is it challenges your students to discuss controversial and complex issues in small groups. So these are provocative issues. These are questions that they can take a stand on. It's not just the factual part of the lesson that you're teaching, but it's something that might have varying perspective. It's something that might have, a judgment involved. Like, should we have dropped the atomic bomb? Should Truman have dropped the atomic bomb on Japan? So that's something that you would take your students through and they can actually take a stand on it. So any TCI activity that is a response group lesson will have that part. It'll be something controversial or complex that they can grapple with. But step 1 puts students in small groups. So if you look at these pictures that are on the slide, you see one group of 4, and then in the picture at the bottom, you see 2 groups of 3. 3 is great. It doesn't always work out that you can have 3. So I would err on the side of a group of 4 rather than 2 partners. The student needs a couple other people. You need varying perspectives and voices inside those groups, okay? So you are creating heterogeneous groups and a suitable classroom arrangement. So again, notice in this picture where the students have their desks pushed together, sometimes that's a little awkward depending on what kind of furniture you have in your classroom. I had separate tables and chairs, and they were heavy and they were hard to push around, but we made it happen. So the students learned, we practiced how to push desks together, and they would sit around the setting of the desks, and I stood up at the screen and I was able to look at each student in the eyes without them turning their head much. They might turn their head a little bit. I can't emphasize how important that is. What you don't want is somebody in a group that has their back to you. Okay, so you want them to be able to see the screen, because sometimes response groups involve images and something that they need to look at. You're preparing them to answer provocative and critical thinking questions. So oftentimes having a little bit of an easy warm-up discussion, which we're going to get into next, the next slide, is a way to get them talking to each other. Because if you have set up the groups, perhaps they don't normally work together and they just kind of need to have something fun to talk about to get the juices flowing. Plus, as many of you are familiar with, TCI lessons start with a preview activity. So, which is the first phase of the lesson that you do with your students. So the preview is actually a great way to already have your students in their response groups of 3 and to have them discuss the preview together because it's contextually related, topically related to what it is that you're going to be doing, and it can act as the warm-up. You will allow students time to prepare their responses. Now, this is where your expertise comes in. Do they need just 3 minutes because they're analyzing an image or listening to a song? Or do they have to read something? And keeping the reading short is what TCI does best. So whatever it is that they have to read and kind of digest in order to have the discussion is kept short, okay? So anywhere from like 3 to 7 minutes, but your expertise is you're wandering around the class, you're watching your students, and you can start to see when they're falling off and they're ready to move on, okay? Also, when I share some best practices, you'll see that we have one that's red, yellow, green light, and that's a great way to have your students visually show you that they're ready. So they have to have time because you're not going to have a good discussion if they haven't had time to really process the information. And then you're ready for a lively classroom discussion where you can implement one of the discussion strategies that we share. You can kind of play around with the TCI lesson and say, well, I'm going to deviate and I'm going to use this fishbowl discussion as a way to create more of a whole class. Okay. So if we take a look at this lesson that is showing on the screen, we see a lesson from our United States through Industrialism program. It's US history. So you would have your students work in teams of 3 and read about Supreme Court cases related to rights and freedoms protected by the Bill of Rights. So they don't know right away what the Supreme Court cases are, but it's like Tinker versus Des Moines and other landmark Supreme Court cases. For each case, they will be determining whether the person or the people have that right. So that's why it's called, do they have the right? Okay. And then they have to provide a justification from their reading notes, or maybe instead of having your students read, you did a mini lecture. That's totally fine as well. However they get their information, but they have to find support for whatever it is that they're going to share with the rest of the class. So that justification piece is huge. Then you can have your students share. And I have a way of sharing that with you. It's in one of the handouts that you'll find in your resources tab. Okay. And then you put them in their groups and they're ready to go. But remember, I said maybe have them in the groups before you even start the lesson with the preview, so you can use the preview as the warm-up discussion. Okay. So here are some suggestions for a warm-up discussion. So you would pick topics that are more suitable to your 7th grade class, to your 8th grade class, to your 6th grade class. I pick topics that are more suitable for you, teachers, in this session right now. So Natasha, why don't you grab a topic and I'm going to have you, the teachers, share in chat. But the caveat is when you share, I'm going to treat you like I would my students. You have to combine your response with evidence and reasoning. And the evidence and reasoning can just be the second sentence. So for example, number 10, I like Peloton because it provides a platform and variety of workouts that I can choose from day to day, and I can do in the privacy of my own home. So that's my answer, my response, that's my evidence, and that's my reasoning. So, Natasha, which topic are we going to do?
Okay, since it's the summer, let's go with going to the mountains versus the beach.
Excellent. Okay, so put your answer in chat. Mountains or beach? Because the mountains. Okay. Excellent. Oh, how lucky you are, Jennifer. The beach is close by. Oh, Minnesota to Florida? Wow. That's a climate change.
I love some of these answers that are coming up. Lots of reasons and evidence in this. Cooler temperatures and skiing. Beaches give you the max sunshine. And there was one I saw where they said, oh, being able to like look out at that open sky when you're at the beach. Isn't that wonderful?
And that's where you close your eyes when you're back in the classroom and just put yourself there when you need to be there.
Exactly.
Okay, and
Oh,
if any of you remember in the opening, I'm from Lake Tahoe, so I have both. I have the mountains and the beach, so it's very, very cool. But I'm not that close. I'm about 20 minutes from the beach. So anyways, I'm envious that you guys have ocean beaches or Gulf beaches that you can go to. Okay, so what you would want to facilitate in your own classroom with this is just direct your students to get into their groups of 3, have the topic up on your screen, have them open up and just have a little chit chat about that while you kind of get set up for your response group. So I always, our district used CER from elementary, middle, and then high school. So I had CER, claim, evidence, reasoning, posters all around the classroom. And there's lots of different acronyms for that. Response, evidence, reasoning. The more we get our students in the habit of using that because and having to support what they're saying, the more prepared they are to be successful with the response group. Okay, so I don't want to do that. Engagement strategies for dynamic discussion. So in your resources link at the bottom of your webinar, you will get a discussion tools handout. And on it, you're going to see some strategies, tools that you can use for discussion. Like I mentioned earlier, you're familiar with them. They might be new to you. The everyone restate is something that I really like because it allows for respect in a response group. Students are really good sometimes, like those few that you said in our preview, the ones that like to answer all the time, they like to be heard, but they don't always like to listen. So everyone restate is a great way to get those ones to listen. Many of you are probably middle school teachers, and you might already have your students sitting in stations where you have station materials available to each group. So the red, yellow, green card might be something you're already using. You can just laminate construction paper at the beginning of the year, but it can be used for beyond response group strategy. It's just a great tool for classroom management. Fist to 5 is quick. I would use the thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways, same thing. This is just a little bit more specific. And then here's your kind of Zen one at the bottom. So repeat, think, breathe, and then share. So it kind of avoids those unsupported just shout outs from your students. It's a good one to train them on. So that's our first page. The second page, I want to draw your attention to the top one, rules for civil discussion. This is what I choose to use for every response group that I do. And then it creates a little redundancy, kind of a patterned behavior that the students are comfortable with. So they always know that when we get to the point in the response group lesson that they have to share for their group, I ask all the presenters to stand. Then the only way they can sit is that they actually present. So that facilitates with having students call on each other. So they stand, they begin with the statement, our group agrees or disagrees. It's not me, it's not I, it's our group. Based on, they have to provide their evidence and their reasoning. And then they have to call on the next presenter by name, or if you're using group names, you could do the same thing. And then they can sit and they have to listen to the remaining groups because they still make them accountable for listening even after they've presented. So these steps here, these 7 steps, you can play around with and change them up if you want, but they are pre-printed on their group number cards in my classroom. So I have them in those plastic sleeves, and then on the back, they know what they have to do. So I really like that one. TCI has a number, especially in social studies, of talk it outs. You know, so Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, counterculture mainstream. Talking it out and understanding perspectives is a really great strategy for discussion. Concentric circles, inner outer circle. This says configuration as shown. It's not shown, but you can just imagine a small circle with a bigger circle around it. And then pen pal chats. I've never done that, but maybe you in your classroom have done something like that. Okay. So you have this handout. You can peruse it a little bit more at your leisure. So just trying to keep.
And Susie, I noticed that I had shared a version that has images, so it was like a little longer document. So then I shared the one later in chat that matches yours exactly. So if anyone was confused, grab that second link and it matches Susie's exactly.
All right. Well, thanks. You're giving them more than we anticipated. So nothing wrong with that. All right. And then the last page on this version is the classic fishbowl discussion, which I think you could insert into a response group strategy. So if the instructions from TCI say to put them in groups of 3, you could certainly say, you know what, I think we've done a couple of those in the last month, so I'm going to vary this lesson up. I'm going to take control and not pay attention to those TCI police at the back of the room that say, no, you're not doing it right. And I'm going to do a fishbowl discussion. Then I want to draw your attention to scored discussion. To me, this is golden because holding your students accountable for what they're doing is huge, as you know. So a scored discussion, which I'll be getting into a little bit later, is a way to do that. So I always, have all of my student group names written down, not just as group 1, but each student in that group. So I can kind of hold them individually accountable as well with what they're doing. Because if somebody from group 1 speaks out and interrupts somebody from group 5 while they're presenting, I need to use that as a teachable moment and make sure that they're not disrupting other groups. So score discussions I'm going to be giving you. And if you've already perused the handouts, there's more information on that. So this is just a little kind of gift from TCI where they've collected some ideas and they're there for you to grapple with and say, hey, I'm gonna use this one.
I got a question asking about civil discussions that I thought was interesting, kind of like a detail, but I was interested to get your perspective. Do you like all of the student from each of the groups to be standing? So like if you have 6 groups, there's 6 groups standing at the beginning and then they sit after they've presented, or do you have everyone sitting and then they just stand when it's their turn?
It's kind of a hybrid of that. I just have the presenter standing from each group. So there's only one person from each group standing, but they're all standing up at the same time. The rest are sitting.
Awesome. Okay, so then I can tell, like, if I'm in group 3, I can look over at group 5 and I can tell who their presenter is because that person is standing at that point.
Right
Perfect.
on. Yeah, it's a great, I got that from another TCI trainer years ago. And when I implemented that little nuanced strategy in my classroom, it made a huge difference because they want to sit, right? They want to get back down, most of them, not all of them. Okay, so you guys are the experts. You're experienced teachers, or you're new, maybe you learned something in your teacher training. What is a discussion practice that you use that you could quickly share with the rest of the participants in this session? That would be great if you could do that.
Well, people are putting that in chat. I have one more question for you, Susie, on this toolkit. Someone had asked in the Q&A, which of these options would work best in a virtual classroom? So I'm curious to get your thoughts. I'll start off, Susie. One that I think we actually, during the pandemic, we put together a kind of free handout on this with red, yellow, green. Where we actually like had the kids a document where the kids could print that out. So like on the screen, they could hold up if they were virtual and on camera, a red, yellow, green to kind of share like, oh, I agree with this. I still have questions. I disagree. So then that gave like a visual for the teacher on when they were in a virtual classroom live that they could get the conversation started with students.
That's great. I mean, I taught virtual for a year being here in California. So, anything we could do to get the kids on camera was helpful. And I know some of you are using virtual lessons with students for varying reasons. I think just any of the ones, it's this to 5, everyone restate, we're having, you could call out students, you could use breakout rooms in Zoom or whatever platform you're using. Talk it out, you could have 2 groups. Right now I want to hear from everybody that represents Martin Luther King. And then I'm going to pick somebody from, and just go back and forth. The ones where it's, rules for civil discussion, having everyone stand, you could just borrow from there, like I agree, disagree, using the language and so forth. Pen pal chats for sure. That one's totally conducive. So, oh, I like the whiteboard idea. I used to use that too. You guys have some great stuff being shared here from your colleagues. Ah, not just waiting for one hand to go up, but several hands to go up. I love this kind of stuff where you get tips from each other. Wow, Chad, that's awesome. Maybe if you guys have, Natasha, quick question. When this is recorded, are they going to get what's in chat?
I don't think that the chat comes through on the recordings. I think it's kind of to keep it like a safe space, right? That your comments are just like with a group that's here live. But one thing I would recommend, I mentioned in chat, this came up in my last group because there was just so many ideas like flying, is to join that Facebook group because that's a place where you can continue to kind of share different ideas, throw out a question like, hey, what would work in a virtual classroom? And you'll have, one of our trainers that moderates that group, but then kind of the whole crowd, like you're seeing here in our chat, that can share thoughts and ideas as well.
That's a great idea. I love that. And just screenshot, open up your chat, and just take a screenshot of it, if you want it really quick. Those are great suggestions. Thanks, Natasha. Okay, well, I'm going to move on. If you're still typing or have an idea to share, please do, because we can all use them. So now we're going to go into what are some TCI program response group activities. So as you can see, again, I've just snagged this slide from the slideshow. And just a reminder that it says response group at the top, and it'll say whatever strategy it happens to be. So this is from Ancient World, and they're going to be learning about Alexander the Great and how he planned out how to run his empire. So in this groups of 3, they're going to learn about his rise to power and specifically his plan to unite his vast empire. So students will get handouts for each phase of the activity. Typically, phases in a response group activity are 3 or 4, and that allows for, which is something that I think needs to be mentioned. If you have a group of 3 and there's 3 phases, everyone in the group has a chance to stand and be the presenter. So this is what's alleviating that, the usual suspects always sharing in the classroom. So after they read this part of his plan, they will then discuss the degree to which they think that part of his plan was successful. So that's the debate part. I think it was successful because, and so on. And I don't think it was successful because, and so on. So they're basically saying why they think it's a good or a bad idea, and they're having to share why. Okay, so CER, their claim, their response, the evidence from the reading. So here we have they have to turn to their reading notes. They have to use what they've already learned so far. And if it's the round is, you're going to give them 7 minutes because they have to read a section out of the TCI textbook. You want to make sure that they all have time to read that, whether they're reading from a physical book that you have in the classroom or whether they're reading from their online account, student account. And then they, in this activity, as part of the response group, they rate each other's response in the group, in the small group of 3, and they have to come to consensus in that group of 3 before they prepare their response for the whole class. So that's a nice aspect of the response groups, is that forming consensus, as we all know in society, is not always the easiest thing to do. So in a way, this is kind of a double dip because we're doing response group activity, but we're also doing skills, which is, learning to listen, learning to understand, agree to disagree. So that's from ancient world. And that's how we know it's in a response group, is in the slideshow when you get to the activity portion. So always peruse that first so you know which strategy you're dealing with. For our medieval world program, this one, which was kind of a new lesson for me to kind of take a look at, and it looks like fun because students actually are going to learn about these sacred, what are they called? Sacred rounds that are part of the Mayan culture, to learn more about the culture. So it was a calendar that was used to determine when to plant, when to hunt, when to cure, when to go to battle or how to cure, how to perform religious ceremonies, what's the best time on the calendar to do that. So they're very in tune with the calendar and the seasons and the days. So they learn thoroughly in this lesson about this calendar and how they match it up. And they even get a handout. It's not an active link that I have up here, but on the handout, they will cut out the round and cut out the piece of the calendar that then you can see the little gears off to the side that they will use to prepare their responses in the class. Okay, so each of the problems that they have to solve, there's 4 rounds in this particular response group lesson, and they have to determine when is the best time to go to war. So that group will come up with their response, and then all the groups will have their presenter stand and share and come up with their responses. So that's a classic response group activity where you are teaching about the content, but you're having students grapple from a Mayan perspective on the best way of using the calendar. Okay. And then we'll go to the US through industrialism. This is a classic activity. I've done this so many times. I've borrowed it and used it at the high school level. And it's about women's rights and the era of reform. So students will work in a group, and they will analyze excerpts from the Declaration of Sentiments, just like one sentence excerpts from that 1848 document. And they will, in their group, discuss the extent to which women today have achieved equal rights. So the lesson itself has a fact sheet on the status of women's rights today, okay? And it's frequently updated by TCI to make it accurate, like how many women are in Congress and, what's the average salary, that kind of thing. So students are challenged with saying whether or not these goals of these women, Susan B. Anthony, for example, have been achieved today. Have they been redressed, these concerns that they have? And they will present their response to the class. They will place their response on a physical spectrum that's part of the slideshow. So they actually are, kind of technically interactive with the slideshow. And then at the end of the lesson, and this is the best part, is you get to see where every group was on that particular reform. So on the spectrum, it's showing group 1, group 3, group 4, group 5, and you can see that as a consensus in the class, it's mostly been redressed or it has not been redressed at all. So you can kind of come back to the original premise of a response group activity and see that we're looking at complex issues. We're looking at maybe controversial issues. We're looking at something with perspectives. And in this case, with women's rights, when you go to form that response group, carefully consider who you have in each group. The same group that you set up for this particular lesson might not be the same group of students that you set up for another topic, because it needs to be kind of related to whatever the topic is. So you're going to want different perspectives from different, gender groups in this group. Okay. So I said we're going to get to this, and we have a little bit of time. And this is scoring discussions. And for me, in my experience using response groups in the classroom, this was so important. So kind of rhetorically, how do you honor the time involved in preparing and presenting a class discussion with a grade? I would turn them into a project grade, and it would get entered in Canvas and entered, in their grades. How do you keep the discussion civil and polite? Well, there's things that you want your students to do and things that you want your students not to do in a response group. How do you keep all students attentive for the entire discussion? Keeping it to, depending on the length of the class period you have, that's key. So you might start it one day and finish it another day, which isn't always ideal because groups then change with student absences. So how do you do that? Scoring. And so what we have for you here is another one of the tools that you have in the resources section of your webinar. And it's a scoring sheet. So if you download it, make a copy of your own, you can change it depending on which response group lesson that you're doing. So you might choose to start everyone with a 75, just a straight C. And depending on how they do during the response group, their grade's either going to go up, hopefully, or it might go down if they're not doing well. And so you'd have a rubric for that. So here's some of the rubric points: looking at the presenter that called on you while speaking, using the previous presenter's name, using the opening statement. Maybe in the class that you have, you're using sentence frames because that's appropriate for the group of learners that you have in your room. Disagrees, but with reasoning, not like, that answer was stupid, but, I disagree with how so-and-so said this because. So these are things, you guys can figure these out. They're pretty self-explanatory, but I think having a scoring sheet, at least for me, I found it really useful. And then I would have each student's name written, like this is group 1, it's Tanya, Frederick, Jose, and then, go on from there. Okay. So These are just some suggestions, and it's on that same handout on the second page that's in the resources, are some positive points and negative points. So, I just use plus and minus as I'm quickly listening, and I might individually go up to those students and tell them, hey, you were kind of monopolizing the discussion, and other groups felt like they couldn't contribute. Okay, so just make sure that you only use the time allowed that was given you. One of my favorites that I'm going to point out on positive is when your students are pretty familiar with response groups and maybe they've done a couple and they're kind of into the class, is using analogies to support an argument. And I loved using that one because that's where they got to be creative. They were in that small group where they could come up with some ideas, and they were really fun to listen to. So the other groups were really excited to listen to what other groups came up with. So criteria for scoring discussions, you can add to it, take away from it, use from these suggestions what you think will work with you and your particular group of students that you get this coming school year. And now we are finished with the response group lesson. And I'm wondering if there's any questions, or Natasha, did you come up with something from chat or Q&A that needs to be addressed?
I think we actually got all of the questions. I know someone just asked me in the Q&A about a copy of the rubric, and that is in chat. So you're going to see it's under there under the tally sheet for scoring class discussions. Susie, I don't know if you have your license open right now. One thing that came up in our last session was like for people to know when they can, when they are using a response group strategy, and like how you can tell in the platform that it is a response group. So if you can share that.
Yep. So I'm going to go into, if you can see in the purple sidebar over here, I'm going to go to, at least I think I'm going to go to, it's just a little slow, lesson overview. So there's two places that you can see what the strategy is. And it's a little bit of digging, but not too much. So your planning orange box up here, overview, materials, procedures. I'm going to click on procedures. And then I'm going to have to expand the box by seeing more. And now this particular lesson is not, it's one that I'm using in a later session today. So this, begin the social studies skill builder. So if it was a response group, it would say begin the response group activity, begin the visual discovery activity, begin the problem solving group work. So that's one place. So that's under procedures inside the planning box while I'm on lesson overview. Okay, so now I'm just going to scroll down because my box got really big because this goes over the whole lesson, right? And I'm going to go to the hand, which is the classroom activity slideshow. And when I open that, I get an overview of what's in the lesson. Okay, so I can either start with a preview and go slide by slide, or I can jump to vocabulary or jump to activity. The activity is where the strategies reside. So if I click on the activity, it says social studies skill builder. So those are the two places, unless it's changed, that I know of where you can find those.
Yeah, that absolutely sounds right. And as you get more familiar with these strategies from the sessions today, looking over that overview of the TCI approach document that we shared, you'll start to recognize, oh yeah, this is one of the response group. I know I want to have my kids in a group of 3. I know I want to have them, pick one presenter to share, that type of thing. And having that framework will really make it easier when it comes to implementing the lessons and knowing the fine points to make it as effective as possible.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to kind of get it and then think, okay, the next time I'm going to maybe do a little nuance using that discussion toolkit that we gave you. Okay. So just a few closing slides for you all before you, and the last one is going to be how to get into your next session, which some of you are already experienced with. So we have our professional development as part of your TCI account, and you can go in and watch Brian or other TCI experts share ways of using the program. You could also get product updates, and we also have a blog that's part of that. It's all on the TCI website. But like Natasha mentioned earlier, Facebook is going to be a great place for you to share tips. And we also have the Insta account that Brian mentioned in the opening session today. So any kind of social media that you're familiar with using and signed up for, you can use to be part of the TCI community. So that's the in-app professional development. I cannot emphasize how wonderful these are. If you are just looking for, gosh, I could just use a refresher on how to use my teacher account, or how students can use their student account, how to grade, how to do this, that, and the other thing. These are fabulous. So right now, whichever number kind of suits the bill that you were able to take away from this response group session, spectrum of 1 being, it was great, it was really helpful, even if you just took away one little thing, or 6, my mind is exploding because it's too close to the school year and I didn't quite get it. So don't forget, it's recorded. You can always go back. Right. So don't forget, there is a drawing. So at the end of the next session, which is the final session, period 3 of the day, you will get a survey. And the survey is going to be super helpful to getting your professional development credits and your swag for today. But you can enter that drawing to get a $100 gift card or this adorable TCI llama, which I have had the privilege of seeing in person. It's pretty cool, but I don't have one. So just letting you know, it'd be great to get that if you could win. All right. And lastly, these are the sessions that you have to choose from for our final period of the day. And I want to thank everybody that chose to come to my session today. Thank you so much and have a great period 3.